There's a sound a child makes when they're truly terrified. Not the crying kind, not the loud kind. I mean the kind that's barely there, like a breath caught halfway, like something small trying to make itself smaller. Like it already knows that making noise won't save it. I heard that sound on the night everything changed for me. And I almost walked past it. My name is Cale Doran, Sector 7 salvage runner. If you don't know what that means, picture a man with a cracked helmet, a breathing recycler held together by 2 bolts and a prayer, and enough debt to buy a small moon. That was me. That's been me for 11 years running the undercorridor of Haveth Station, a city-sized orbital platform that floats in the outer bands of the Severith Belt, about 3 light towers from anywhere anyone decent wants to be. Haveth isn't the worst place in the settled clusters, but it's also not trying very hard to be anything better. The station runs on 3 tiers. Upper tier is clean, climate-controlled, smells like recycled lavender and money. The kind of place where every wall is a screen and every screen shows something beautiful. I've been up there twice in my life. Once to deliver a cargo manifest, I was paid 30 credits to hand-deliver because the client didn't trust the transit drones. Once to fix a ventilation coupling in a corridor, so perfect it made me feel like a stain on the floor. Mid-tier is where most people live. Shops, quarters, service tunnels, the transit loops, crowded and loud and reasonably tolerated. Then there's the undercorridor, which is where I live, which is where we all live, the salvagers, the off-grid workers, the ones who didn't make it into contract housing. It's below the station's official pressure maps. Technically, it doesn't exist, which means no enforcement patrols, no medical drone routing, no light schedule. You buy your own lamps, you fix your own walls, and you learn very quickly that the dark down here belongs to something older than you. The Veteran, that's what the station records call them, in the few records that acknowledge their existence at all. Most people just say vampires. The Veteran arrived on Haveth about 40 years ago, before my time, as part of some diplomatic arrangement between the Settled Clusters Council and the Veteran Dominion, which controls 3 full systems on the far side of the Severith Belt. The agreement was structured, documented, sealed with 7 different political endorsements. And then, like most agreements made by people who don't have to live with the consequences, it quietly stopped being enforced. Now the Veteran have their own section of the station. Mid-tier access, sealed corridors, dim light environmental controls. They don't come into the undercorridor unless they want something. Which, in my experience, means they come into the undercorridor exactly as often as they feel like it. Most humans down here have an arrangement with that fact. You don't go into the sealed sections. They don't go into yours. You keep your biometric band updated so the passive scanners can read your species marker and route the feeding license checks accordingly. Everybody pretends this is a functional society. It mostly works. Until the night it didn't. I was coming back from a deep shaft run. Below the undercorridor, there are maintenance tunnels that go all the way down to the station's magnetic anchor arrays, massive electromagnetic rigs that keep Haveth from drifting into the belt. Every few months, salvagers like me go down and strip whatever the anchor arrays have caught. Debris mostly, sometimes equipment that fell off ships, occasionally something that shouldn't be there and you take it and you don't ask questions. That night I'd found 3 decent power cells and a navigation coil that was probably stolen off a mid-tier supply ship. Good haul. I was tired in the way that lives in your bones, the kind of tired where your legs are still moving mostly out of habit. The corridor I was walking back through, under corridor level 4, section 9 Bravo, is long. Maybe 800 meters, pale orange maintenance lights, 1 working ventilation duct and 2 broken ones, walls that sweat moisture in the temperature differential between the anchor levels and the living levels. It smells like metal and recycled air, and the particular odor of a place that's been inhabited by people with limited access to clean water. I know every meter of it. I've walked it probably 400 times. So I noticed when something was different. About halfway down the corridor, where a junction branches left into a dead-end storage cluster that nobody uses anymore, there was something. A sound. I almost classified it as a ventilation rattle. Almost. But it happened again, that small caught breath, that sound. I stopped. I stood in the orange-lit corridor with my salvage pack digging into my left shoulder and my recycler clicking on the exhale, and I listened. Again, quiet, So quiet you'd miss it if your brain wasn't tuned to the frequency of things that are wrong. I turned left. The storage cluster is a series of 5 old cargo alcoves, standard hexagonal frames, about 3 meters deep each. They were supposed to hold emergency rations back when this section of the station was still officially in use. Now they're mostly empty, or full of the kind of junk that other salvagers considered not worth taking. The lights don't work in there. I clicked on my helmet lamp. The beam swept across the first alcove. Empty, second, a pile of polymer sheeting, old and brittle, third. There, pushed into the back corner of the third alcove, wedged between 2 old equipment frames, was a child. Small, maybe 4 years old, maybe 5. Impossible to be more precise, dark hair. Pale even by veteran standards, and they're all pale. The pallor goes all the way through them. It's not complexion, it's cellular. The child's skin in my helmet light looked like something that had never seen a lamp before. The eyes were open, very dark, almost entirely iris, which is typical of young veteran. Their light sensitivity adaptation means the pupil structure is different. They can barely tolerate even the orange glow of my lamp. The child flinched from my light. I shifted my helmet lamp upward so it reflected off the ceiling instead of hitting the alcove directly. Indirect, softer. I don't know why I knew to do that. Maybe I'd just been around long enough to pick up things without noticing. The child looked at me. I looked at the child. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then I saw the arm. The child's left arm was held against its chest at an angle that wasn't natural. Not a break. Something worse, there was a section of structural scaffolding, thin but solid, the kind they use in temporary partition walls that had apparently come loose from somewhere above the alcoves and fallen across the child's arm. Pinned it, not crushing, but stuck. The child couldn't move without dragging that arm across the edge, and the edge was sharp enough that one wrong move would open the vein at the wrist. I don't know how long the child had been there. The arm had a small laceration, already trying to close, which is faster in veteran, I knew that, but it hadn't fully sealed. There was a dark mark on the polymer sheeting underneath. Not a lot, but enough. The child made that sound again, the barely there caught breath sound. I know, I said, that's a bad position to be in. I didn't expect a response. What I got was the child's eyes tracking to me with an intensity that didn't match the age. Veteran children are cognitively more developed than the physical size suggests. That's one of the things people forget. I'm going to move that piece of scaffolding, I said. Slowly, and then you're going to have a sore arm, but it won't be stuck anymore. Does that sound okay? The child blinked. That's a yes in the veteran way. A single slow blink. I crouched down, set my salvage pack to the side. This was going to require both hands, and I needed to be careful, because if I moved the scaffold wrong it would torque the wrist and tear the laceration open wider. The child was scared but still. Very still. That kind of stillness that takes more discipline than most adults have. I got my hands under the scaffold at the point nearest the arm. Long piece, 3 meters. The weight wasn't enormous, but the balance was tricky. I needed to lift the near end while keeping the far end from dropping, which would lever the whole thing down at the wrong point. Don't move, I said. Just for the next 10 seconds, then you're free. I lifted. The scaffold came up. The child's arm slid clear. I held the scaffold still until I could angle it back against the alcove wall without it swinging loose. Then I set it down. The child immediately pulled the arm in, held it, looked at the laceration. I reached into my salvage pack. I carry a basic field kit, most runners do, because if something goes wrong and the anchor tunnels 300 meters below anyone who might help you, it's your supplies or it's nothing. Sealant strips, clotting compound, pressure bandage. Human-coded, technically, but I knew veteran physiology close enough to know the sealant strips would work on the laceration. Can I said. Another slow blink. I applied the strip, carefully. The child watched my hands the whole time with those dark, serious eyes, not frightened exactly, evaluating. When I was done, I sat back on my heels and looked at this small veteran child who was now sitting in a derelict storage alcove in the undercorridor of Haveth Station with a sealant strip on their arm, and the expression of someone who had been through something and was not entirely done processing it. Where are you supposed to be? I asked. The child said something, soft, in veteran, The primary dialect, Vethric, which I don't speak well, but I've picked up fragments over 11 years of living adjacent to them. What I caught was a word that meant something like above or upper, combined with a proper noun that I didn't recognize at first. Then I recognized it. It was a name, a family name, a Vethrin clan designator. The Solen. I knew that name. Everybody on Haveth who paid any attention to the political layer knew that name. The Solen were one of the 3 primary clans of the Vethrin Dominion. Old. Important in the way that old power is important, not just wealthy, not just politically connected, but woven into the actual structure of things in a way that went back centuries before the settled clusters even existed. What a child from that family was doing in an abandoned alcove in the undercorridor of this station was a question with no comfortable answer. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Then I picked up my pack, held out my hand, and said, "Let's get you somewhere better than this." The child looked at my hand. Then, with the gravity of someone making a considered decision, reached out and took it. Getting from the undercorridor to the Vethrin-accessible levels of mid-tier is not simple, and doing it while escorting a Vethrin child in the middle of a station night cycle is the kind of thing that makes you very aware of every security panel and transit scanner you pass. The biometric readers would flag the child as Vethrin. That's fine, Vethrin are legal on Haveth. What they'd also flag is the absence of the child's registered travel record in the transit system, which would trigger a query at the nearest enforcement post, which would take approximately 8 minutes to generate an automated response, which would then sit in a queue for however long it took a human enforcement officer to notice it. And the enforcement officers who worked the undercorridor night shift were not historically known for their attentiveness. I figured I had a window. I took the service corridors instead of the transit loops. Service corridors don't have the same biometric reader density. They have proximity sensors, but those only flag density anomalies. Too many people moving in an unusual pattern. 2 people walking steadily don't register as a problem. The child kept pace with me, didn't complain, the arm had to hurt, they didn't show it. We came up through a maintenance hatch on mid-tier level 12, which puts you in the service space behind the water processing relays. From there, it's about a 4-minute walk to the edge of the Vethrin corridor designation, Section 3 Veth, which is what the station maps call it. What the Vethrin call it is considerably more elaborate. The entrance to the Vethrin section isn't dramatic. It doesn't have guards standing at either side in armor. It's a standard corridor with slightly different environmental settings. Cooler, dimmer, the ventilation tuned differently. There's a passive biosign reader mounted in the ceiling, standard issue, the same as any other corridor on the station. The difference is what it's reading for and what it does with the information. I knew that if I walked through that reader with this child, it would log me. A human biometric entering the Vethrin section at this hour with an unregistered minor in transit. That was the kind of log entry that went somewhere eventually. But the alternative was, what? Leave the child at the threshold, go back to my quarters and pretend this hadn't happened. I walked through. The corridor shifted around me, temperature down about 3 degrees. The lighting overhead, which had been the station's standard cool white, faded toward the deep blue-violet end of the spectrum. My eyes needed a moment to adjust. The child beside me seemed to relax by some perceptible amount, the way a person does when they've come in from wind. I'd been in this section once before, years ago, for reasons I won't go into. What I remembered was the quiet. The Vethrin corridors are very quiet. The ventilation runs at a different pitch below the audible threshold. The walls have a different material composition, something that absorbs rather than reflects. The silence is the first thing you notice and the last thing you forget. We walked. The child's grip on my hand had gotten slightly tighter. I wasn't sure if that was reassurance to me or reassurance to them. Maybe both. About 60 meters in, someone came around the corner ahead of us. I stopped. The person who came around the corner was not a child. She was, and I want to be careful here because words like tall or striking don't really do the work that's needed. She was present in a room in the way that very few people are present. When I say that, I mean there are people who are in a space, and then there are people who the space seems to organize itself around. Like gravity, but personal. She was Vethrin. That was immediately clear from the pallor, the structural specifics of the face, the eyes dark, the same as the child's, but with an older kind of intensity in them. She was dressed in something between formal and tactical, a layered composite material in deep charcoal and dark blue, with silver fittings that I would later learn were rank indicators. Her hair was dark and pulled back in the precise manner of someone who makes deliberate choices about where their attention goes. She stopped when she saw me. The look on her face was many things simultaneously. The primary one, for about 2 full seconds, was relief of such intensity that it almost looked like pain. Then her eyes moved to the child at my side. The child made a sound, a different sound from the caught breath one, something I'd call recognition, softened by something else. The woman crossed the distance between us in a way that was not quite normal human movement. Vethrin moved differently. There's a quality to it like watching something very certain about where it's going, and she crouched down to the child's level in one fluid motion. She spoke in Vethric, rapid low, the kind of voice that is keeping itself very controlled. The child responded, also in Vethric slower, with some of the vocabulary she'd used with me earlier. The woman's gaze moved from the child to the sealant strip on the arm. Then up to me. And the quality of that look, I had to think about it afterward, because in the moment all I registered was the impact of it was complicated. Assessment, recognition of something unexpected, and underneath that, something that I would have called gratitude if I were the type of person who assumes the best about moments. She stood full height, which meant she was looking slightly down at me. She had a few centimeters of height advantage, which is not unusual for Vethrin. "Your name," she said. "Not a question." "Cale Doran," I said. "Salvage runner registered under Corridor 7. My biometric is in the transit log. I know I shouldn't be in this section. I'll go." "Where did you find her?" "Storage cluster in the undercorridor. Section 9 Bravo. She was pinned under collapsed scaffolding." A pause, very short, but I could read something moving behind those eyes, something that was working through implications. "How long I don't know. The laceration had started to seal. Vethrins seal faster than human. My best guess, 2, maybe 3 hours. Another pause. "The scaffolding," she said. "Was it structural failure or—" "I don't know," I said. "I moved it. I didn't examine it. It looked like a failed anchor bracket the mounting point had sheared, but I didn't look closely." She accepted this. "You applied the sealant." "Yes, human-coded, but it's compatible with surface lacerations. The biochemistry is close enough at the epidermal level. She'll need a proper medical scan to check the deeper tissue." She looked at me for a moment that was a little longer than conversation required. "You know Vethrin physiology," she said. "I know enough," I said. "You live adjacent to people for 11 years, you pick things up." The child said something. I caught one word, which was the Vethric word for good, and what I thought was the Vethric word for careful, though I wasn't certain of the second one. The woman's expression shifted slightly. By Vethrin standards, that's the equivalent of a significant change. "I am Sarah Solen," she said. I recognized the name. The Solen clan, yes, but the specific name registered something else, something I hadn't known. "The station liaison," I said, not quite a question. "Among other designations, yes." The Vethrin Dominion's liaison to Haveth Station was one of the more consequential political roles in this part of the belt. I hadn't known her name before tonight, but I knew the position. Everyone in the undercorridor knew the position, because the decisions made in that office occasionally rippled all the way down to whether salvagers got to keep running the anchor tunnels, or whether those tunnels got reclassified as restricted. She was, in terms of the hierarchy of Haveth's actual power, very far from the undercorridor, very far from me. "Cale Doran," she said again, like she was filing it somewhere. "That's me," I said. The child reached out and touched my hand, just a small, quick touch, then let go. I looked at the child, then back at Sarah Solen. "She should get that arm checked properly," I said. "The sealant will hold tonight, but there might be contusion in the deeper tissue. The scaffolding had enough weight to matter." "Yes," she said, "I know." A pause. "You will be compensated," she said. "You don't need to do that." "I am aware that I don't need to," she said. "I am telling you that I will." There's a way some people say things that closes a conversational door very cleanly. She had that quality. Okay, I said. She held my gaze for a moment, that same complicated look. Then she turned, took the child's hand, and moved back down the corridor. I stood there for a moment in the blue-violet light of the veteran section, my salvage pack still on my shoulder, my recycler clicking. Then I turned and walked back to the undercorridor. The next 3 days were normal, which is to say they were the kind of days that stack up and don't leave marks. 2 short anchor runs, 1 courier delivery for a spare parts trader in mid-tier, a long evening fixing the ventilation coupling in my quarters, which had been rattling for 6 weeks. I thought about the child occasionally, whether the arm had been cleared properly, whether anyone had investigated the scaffolding failure, whether the clan had figured out how she'd ended up in the undercorridor in the first place. I didn't think about Sarah Solen, or rather, I thought about her the way you think about something that doesn't quite compute, not often, but with a certain weight when you do. On the 4th day, I got a notification. Not a message, an in-person notification, which means someone came to my section of the undercorridor and knocked on the actual door of my quarters, which is made of polymer sheeting over an original station hatch frame and doesn't keep sound out effectively in either direction. I opened it. Standing in my corridor in the orange maintenance light, looking like someone who had arrived from a considerably different station and was not quite sure what to make of this one, was a veteran man. Young, early establishment of rank age, which is somewhere in their 20s by human years, though they're physically indistinguishable from a 16-year-old human to anyone who doesn't know the markers. He was wearing formal veteran day clothes, which in the undercorridor looked approximately like someone showing up to a scrapyard in a suit. "Cale Doran," he said. He had a formal tone that was either practiced or genuinely how he spoke. "That's me," I said. "You are requested at the Dominion Liaison Office, 6th hour." Today. I looked at him, he looked at me. Behind him, my corridor smelled like recycler fluid and old polymer. "Okay," I said. He nodded, turned, left. The Dominion Liaison Office is in mid-tier level 8, in a section of the station that sees actual cleaning drones on a regular schedule. The floors are smooth. The lighting is proper, full spectrum, the kind that doesn't make you look like you live underground. There are small potted plants in the corridor near the office entrance, which is a detail I noticed because I hadn't seen a plant in person for about 2 years, and I had apparently become the kind of person who notices plants. I'd cleaned up before coming. Actual clean clothes, not just a change of the same worn items. Ran a proper hygiene cycle, which takes longer than the quick versions I usually do. Told myself this was just courtesy and not any particular reason. The office entrance had a reader that I presented my biometric to. A soft tone, a pause, a green indicator. Inside, a reception area. A veteran man, older, with the quiet efficiency of someone who manages things, who looked at my biometric confirmation on his screen and said, "She's expecting you, through that door." I went through that door. The room on the other side was large by station standards. Environmental controls different from the standard corridors, cooler, the lighting shifted toward the blue end, though not as extreme as the full veteran section. A proper desk, not a standing terminal. 2 chairs on the visitor side. Behind the desk, Sarah Solen. Without the context of the darkened corridor and the emergency of 3 nights ago, she was different. Or rather, she was the same, but I could see the specifics more clearly. The rank indicators I'd noticed on her clothing were more formal here, arranged in a deliberate pattern. The way she sat was completely still in the way veteran achieve when they choose to. She looked like she occupied her space with full intention, like she'd chosen to be in this exact room on this exact chair, and the choice was complete. She looked up when I came in. "Cale Doran," she said. "Ms. Solen," I said. A small movement at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, acknowledgement. "Sit," she said. I sat. She looked at me for a moment across the desk. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She reached to the side of the desk and turned the lighting environment slightly warmer. Just a few degrees on the spectrum, more comfortable for human eyes. That was a deliberate adjustment, for me. "Vethia is recovered," she said. It took me a moment to understand that was the child's name, Vethia. "I'm glad to hear it," I said. The arm had mild contusion in the subcutaneous layer, as you suspected. No deeper damage. The sealant strip you applied prevented meaningful blood loss. The medical assessment indicated your intervention was timely. She seemed tough, I said. She is, Sarah said, the small not-quite smile again. She is 4 years old and has already been described by 3 clan elders as a challenge. This is considered high praise among the Solen. I found myself almost smiling. The scaffolding, she said, shifting, back to the factual. It was not structural failure. I waited. The anchor bracket had been cut, she said. Imprecisely, which is why it didn't look immediately obvious. But it had been cut and repositioned with the intent that it would fail under specific weight distribution conditions. I thought about the alcove, the polymer sheeting on the floor, the child's arm angle. Someone knew she'd be there, I said. Or ensured she would be there, Sarah said. I stayed quiet. The political dimensions of this are extensive, she said. I am not going to explain them to you in full because they are not something you need to carry. What I will tell you is that Vethia is the youngest recognized member of the Solen primary lineage, and that her recovery matters beyond the familial. Someone wanted to remove her, I said. Yes, and failed. Yes, she said, because you were walking back through Section 9 Bravo at the 3rd station hour with your helmet lamp on and your salvage pack over your left shoulder. I absorbed that. I almost didn't stop, I said. I know, she said. You told me you were going to go past her, that you almost classified the sound as ventilation noise. I didn't tell you that. Vethia told me. A pause. She has remarkable recall for her age. She told me what you said, that you heard her and you almost walked past, and then you didn't. I looked at the desk, then back at her. Anybody would have stopped, I said. Sarah Solen looked at me with an expression that was very precisely calibrated. No, she said, they would not have. The directness of that landed somewhere. I would like to compensate you for what you did, she said. Financially, I have prepared a figure. She indicated a data slate to her right. It is above what convention would suggest because what you did was above what convention would suggest. That's not necessary. We have already had this conversation. I paused, you remember that? I remember everything, she said simply. I am Vethrin. Right, they do, it's one of the things. Before you decide on compensation, she said, I would like to propose an alternative or an addition. I waited. She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that means the next sentence matters. You know this station, she said. The undercorridor levels, the service tunnels, the anchor array access points. You know them the way someone who has lived in them knows them, not from a map, but from having moved through them in the dark for 11 years. Yes, I said. I need that knowledge, she said. There are things happening on this station that occur below the scan threshold of our monitoring systems, below the enforcement corridors, below the routes that any official representative of the Dominion would naturally travel. I understood what she was saying. You want a guide, I said. I want someone who knows what I cannot know by reading a station schematic, she said. Who can tell me whether a bracket failure looks accidental or deliberate? Who can move through the undercorridor without generating the kind of attention that my presence there would generate? I'm not an investigator, I said. I am not hiring an investigator, she said. I am hiring a person with irreplaceable context. I thought about it, sat with the weight of it. For how long, I said. Unknown, she said, until the situation is resolved or until the engagement is no longer useful. And if I find something that points toward people on this station who would be very unhappy about being found, then you bring that information to me, she said, and I handle those people. The way she said handle was very level, very calm. It had the quality of someone describing a routine task. What's the compensation? I said. She pushed the data slate across the desk. I looked at it. I was quiet for a moment. This is a year's income, I said. For an initial period, yes, she said, with extension provision. I sat back. 11 years in the undercorridor. 11 years of anchor runs and salvage loads and fixing my own walls and rationing my recycler fluid and calculating whether I had enough in the account to cover the next biometric registration fee. 11 years of that sound, the station settling, the ventilation rattling, the nothing-changingness of a life lived in the parts of a place that don't show up on the maps. And here was a door. I'd want to keep the salvage runs, I said, part-time. I'm not walking away from the corridor entirely. People down there know me. That would be preferable, she said immediately. You being present in the undercorridor as part of your normal pattern is exactly the correct cover. I looked at the data slate one more time. Okay, I said. She reached out and took the slate back. Something settled in her posture, not quite satisfaction. Resolution, the sense of a decision that had already been made being confirmed. You'll need access to certain systems, she said. I'll authorize a provisional Dominion contact code. It will allow you to reach my direct channel at any hour. I've never had a Dominion contact code, I said. No human in the undercorridor has one, she said. There was a pause. How old is Vethia to you? I said. Familially. The question came out before I decided to ask it. Saris looked at me steadily. She is my sister's child, she said. My sister died 4 years ago, so she is mine in the practical sense, in the sense that matters. 11 years of the undercorridor teaches you to read a face for what it's not saying. What Saris Solen's face wasn't saying in that moment was enormous and kept very carefully contained, in the way of someone who has had years of practice at containment. Then I'm glad I stopped, I said. Something crossed her expression, quick gone. Yes, she said quietly, so am I. The day after I took the agreement, I went back to Section 9 Bravo. I told myself it was professional, due diligence. First task was to understand what had actually happened, and that meant seeing the alcove in daytime, or what passes for daytime in the undercorridor, which is an hour where the maintenance lights run at slightly higher brightness. The storage cluster looked smaller in that light, or maybe the emergency of a few nights ago had given it a scale it didn't actually have. I went to the third alcove. The polymer sheeting was still on the floor. The dark mark from Vethia's arm was still there, small, darker in the middle, the edges dried to a ring. The scaffolding piece was where I'd put it against the wall. Long, 3 meters, standard modular, the kind they use in temporary partitions all over the undercorridor. I looked at the mounting bracket. It had been cut. Saris was right imprecisely, which was the tell. A clean cut would have looked intentional immediately. This one was made to look like progressive metal fatigue, stress fractures developing over time. But stress fractures in a bracket anchor follow a specific geometry. This cut didn't follow that geometry. It was close, but it wasn't right. Someone had done their research and not quite done it correctly. I took images with my personal scanner, close-ups of the bracket, the cutting angle, the material edge which, once you knew to look, showed tool marks that no fatigue fracture would leave. I thought about what it meant. Whoever had done this knew Vethia would be in this alcove, which meant they either tracked her here or directed her here. A 4-year-old Vethran child doesn't wander into the undercorridor by accident. They have monitoring systems for children of the primary lineage that are considerably more sophisticated than anything the station's own systems run. She had been led here or brought here, and then left under a rigged scaffolding that was designed to fail with specific weight distribution. Enough to injure, possibly enough to kill, structured to look accidental. Someone inside the Vethran section knew exactly where she was and what the bracket failure would do to her. That was a different kind of problem than I'd expected when I took this engagement. I stood in the empty alcove with my scanner images and the smell of old polymer and the orange light, and I thought about a small child sitting in this dark space with her arm pinned, and that barely their sound. And I thought about the woman who had said she is mine, in the practical sense. And I thought about 11 years of walking this corridor, without any of this mattering to me. I put my scanner in my pack, turned off the direct beam, tilted it upward for the softer, reflected light. Old habit. That night I couldn't sleep. It wasn't unusual. The undercorridor has its own sounds at the dark hours, the anchor arrays cycling, the ventilation cycling, the wall material expanding and contracting in the temperature differentials. I've slept through all of it for 11 years. What I couldn't sleep through was the image in my head. Not the alcove, not the scaffolding or the bracket or the tool marks. The look on Sarah Solen's face in that corridor when she turned the corner and saw her sister's child standing there with a strange human's hand in hers. That 2-second window of relief, so intense it looked like pain. I know that look. I've seen it on people in the undercorridor when something they were afraid of didn't happen, when the debt collector doesn't come today, when the recycler that's been making that noise doesn't fail, not today, when the someone you were worried about walks back through the door. I've seen it on people who have been holding themselves together under serious pressure, and suddenly have 3 seconds to let some of that go before they have to be functional again. I'd seen it on Sarah Solen's face in a veteran corridor at 2 in the station morning, and I'd filed it away, and now it wouldn't leave me alone. I lay on my bunk staring at the ceiling of my quarters, polymer sheeting, the cable conduit that runs along the left wall, the lamp I'd salvaged from an anchor level 2 years ago that's slightly too bright, but I've never bothered to dim because it's the kind of thing you live around, and I thought about this. About what it means to be responsible for something small and irreplaceable. About what it means when someone tries to take that from you. About what kind of person spends time in the political machinery of a station trying to figure out who did that and why. And what kind of person walks the anchor tunnels 300 meters below and knows where the tool marks don't match the pattern. Maybe, I thought, maybe those are the same kind of person, operating in different layers of the same station. I closed my eyes. The ventilation rattled. The anchor arrays cycled. Haveth Station moved through the dark of the Severith Belt, trailing its electromagnetic wake, full of its 100,000 lives, and its 2 tiers, and its undercorridor, and its careful political arrangements that occasionally stop being enforced. And somewhere in mid-tier level 8, in an office with slightly warmer lighting than the veteran standard, I was reasonably certain that Sarah Solen was not sleeping either. At the 6th hour of the next station day, I was walking through Section 9, Bravo, with my salvage pack over my left shoulder, same as always. My recycler clicked on the exhale. My helmet lamp was on. In my inner pocket, a Dominion contact code. On the 3rd alcove wall, the scaffolding piece I'd moved 5 nights ago, with a bracket that someone had cut wrong. I stopped at the junction, turned left, went in, started at the beginning. Because here's the thing I've learned in 11 years of the undercorridor, in the anchor tunnels and the dead-end storage clusters, and the corridors that don't appear on any official map. The things that matter, the things that actually matter, are almost never in the places you expect to find them. They're in the 3rd alcove. They're in the barely there sound. They're in the reflected light instead of the direct beam, and in the question of whether a bracket failed or was cut, and in the face of someone who has been holding themselves together for a very long time and has one unguarded moment in a dim corridor at 2 in the morning. That's where the real things are. And if you know how to look, if you've trained yourself, across 11 years of moving through the dark parts of places that don't show up on maps, you can find them. I was done walking past,